lying in that hospital bed, with tubes connected to my body and machines beeping around me, I watched every movement, every whispered word, every tear shed by the faces surrounding me. They thought I was unconscious, at death's door, but in reality I was more alert than I had ever been. For 3 weeks pretending to be in a coma, I discovered secrets I never imagined existed within my own family. And when I finally opened my eyes, revealing that it was all an elaborate performance, what I saw in their faces marked me forever. Before we begin, don't forget to leave your like and subscribe to the channel. Stay with me until the end of this story and tell me in the comments which city you're watching from, so I'll know how far my words are reaching. Thank you. Hello, my name is Marcus. I'm 67 years old. It all started on a particularly cold Tuesday morning in October. I remember it clearly because I had just finished my usual breakfast: scrambled eggs with cheese, wheat toast, and black coffee, the same meal I'd been having for the past 20 years at my penthouse overlooking Central Park. The routine had become sacred to me, a small constant in a life that had been anything but predictable. I was reading the Wall Street Journal, checking how my restaurant chain stocks were performing, when my phone rang. It was Dr. Richardson, my personal physician and one of the few people I truly considered a friend. "Marcus, can you come to my office today? There's something important I need to discuss with you." His voice carried a weight I hadn't heard before. Dr. Richardson had been my doctor for over 15 years, ever since I could afford private health care. He was more than a physician, he was someone who had witnessed my journey from a struggling entrepreneur to a billionaire, someone who knew my body better than I did myself. His office was located in one of those prestigious medical buildings on the Upper East Side, the kind of place where celebrities and politicians went for their checkups. The waiting room always smelled like expensive leather and fresh flowers, with classical music playing softly in the background. When I arrived that afternoon, the autumn sun was filtering through the large windows, casting long shadows across the polished marble floors. "Marcus," Dr. Richardson said as I settled into the familiar leather chair across from his mahogany desk, "I've been watching your family during your recent visits, and I've noticed something troubling." He leaned forward, his gray eyes serious behind his wire-rimmed glasses. "Every time you come in for a checkup, every time we discuss any health concern, they immediately start asking about your will, your estate planning, your succession plans. It's as if they're waiting for bad news." I had noticed it too, but I had pushed those observations to the back of my mind. Nobody wants to believe that the people they love most might be counting down the days until their death. But Dr. Richardson was right. Just last month, when I had mentioned a minor chest pain during a family dinner, my daughter Sarah had immediately asked if I had updated my will recently. My son Michael had inquired about the company's succession plan. My ex-wife Linda had suddenly become interested in our old life insurance policies. "What are you suggesting, Doc?" I asked, though part of me already knew where this conversation was heading. Dr. Richardson stood up and walked to his window, looking out at the busy street below. "What if we gave them exactly what they seem to be waiting for? What if we created a situation where you could observe their true nature when they think you can't see or hear them?" The idea was audacious, almost crazy. But as I sat there in that comfortable office, surrounded by Dr. Richardson's medical degrees and awards, I realized it made perfect sense. I had built my empire from nothing, starting with a small sandwich cart in the Bronx when I was just 22 years old. Back then, I could only afford day-old bread and the cheapest cuts of meat, but I made those sandwiches with love and determination. I worked 18-hour days, 7 days a week, dreaming of something bigger. From that humble cart, I had grown my business into Marcus's Kitchen, a chain of soul food restaurants that now stretched from Maine to Florida. We had locations in Harlem, Brooklyn, Atlanta, Detroit, Chicago, and dozens of other cities. Each restaurant served the kind of food I grew up eating: mac and cheese that reminded you of your grandmother's recipe, fried chicken that was crispy on the outside and tender on the inside, collard greens seasoned just right, and cornbread that melted in your mouth. But success had come with a price. The more money I made, the more people seemed interested in what would happen to it when I was gone. Extended family members who hadn't spoken to me in years suddenly started calling. Old friends began visiting more frequently. Even my immediate family's behavior had changed over the past few years, becoming more attentive whenever health topics arose. How would this work exactly? I found myself asking Dr. Richardson. He turned back from the window, a slight smile on his face. We stage a medical emergency. I'd bring you to my private hospital, create falsified medical records showing a terminal diagnosis, and then you slip into what everyone believes is a coma. You'll be given light sedatives that will make you appear unconscious while still allowing you to remain aware of your surroundings. We can maintain this for several weeks if necessary. The plan was elaborate, risky, and completely outside anything I had ever considered. But at 67 years old, with a fortune worth $5.4 billion, I needed to know who truly cared about Marcus the man, not Marcus the bank account. Give me 24 hours to think about it, I told him as I left his office that day. That evening, I sat in my study, a room filled with leather-bound books I actually read, photographs from my restaurant's grand openings, and awards from various business organizations. The room smelled like the Cuban cigars I occasionally enjoyed and the old leather of my father's chair, the only piece of furniture I had kept from my childhood home. As I looked out at the city lights twinkling below, I thought about my life, my legacy, and the people I was planning to leave it all to. My daughter Sarah was 38, a successful marketing executive who had always been independent and driven. She had her MBA from Wharton and ran her own consulting firm. My son Michael was 35, supposedly working in real estate development, though his ventures never seemed to be as successful as he claimed. My ex-wife Linda and I had divorced 10 years ago, but she still received a substantial monthly allowance as part of our settlement. My brother David had been my business partner for over 20 years, helping me expand the restaurant chain across multiple states. These were the people who would inherit my life's work. But were they the people who deserved it? The next morning, I called Dr. Richardson. Let's do it. The preparation took exactly 1 week. Dr. Richardson created an entire medical history showing that I had been suffering from a rare and aggressive form of cancer that had gone undetected until it was too late. He fabricated test results, X-rays, and consultation notes from fictional specialists. The documentation was so thorough that even I was impressed by the attention to detail. The beauty of this particular diagnosis, he explained as we went over the plan in his office, is that it explains why you would deteriorate so quickly and why the coma would be so deep. According to these records, the cancer has spread to your brain, affecting your consciousness but leaving your other vital functions stable enough to sustain life for an extended period. We chose Mount Sinai Private Medical Center for the staging. It was a small, exclusive hospital where Dr. Richardson had privileges, and where patient privacy was taken extremely seriously. The staff was discreet, professional, and accustomed to treating high-profile individuals who valued their anonymity. On a rainy Thursday morning in November, exactly 1 week after our final planning meeting, Dr. Richardson called me at 6 a.m. Marcus, you need to get to the hospital immediately. You collapsed at home and your housekeeper found you unconscious. Of course, I hadn't collapsed. I had been awake since 5, having my usual breakfast and reading the morning news. But according to the story we had crafted, my housekeeper Maria had found me unconscious in my study and had called 911. The ambulance had brought me to Mount Sinai, where Dr. Richardson had immediately taken over my care. When I arrived at the hospital through a discreet side entrance, Dr. Richardson was waiting with a wheelchair and a small team of nurses who were in on our plan. Remember, he whispered as they helped me into the hospital gown. The sedative will make you drowsy but not unconscious. You'll be able to hear everything, but you need to remain completely still. No matter what you hear or see, you cannot react. The private room they had prepared looked exactly like what you would expect for a dying billionaire. It was spacious and elegantly appointed, with a large window overlooking the East River. Medical equipment surrounded the bed, heart monitors, for drips, oxygen tanks, and various machines whose steady beeping would become the soundtrack to the next 3 weeks of my life. As Dr. Richardson inserted the 4-line and connected the monitoring equipment, he went over the final details. I've already contacted your family. They should start arriving within the next few hours. Sarah is flying in from Los Angeles, Michael is driving up from Philadelphia, Linda will be here this afternoon, and David should arrive by evening. The mild sedative began to take effect, making my limbs feel heavy and my eyelids difficult to keep open. But my mind remained sharp, alert to every sound, every conversation, every footstep in the hallway outside my room. The first person to arrive was Sarah. I heard her heels clicking rapidly down the hospital corridor, followed by the sound of her voice asking the nurses for directions to my room. When she opened the door and saw me lying there, surrounded by all those machines, she gasped. "Oh, Daddy," she whispered, rushing to my bedside. Her hand felt warm as she grasped mine, and for a moment, I felt guilty about what we were putting her through. "The doctor says you collapsed at home this morning. Maria found you unconscious in your study." She stayed for about an hour, mostly sitting in silence, occasionally talking to me about her work, her latest client, a new apartment she was considering in Manhattan. Her voice was gentle, caring, exactly what I would have expected from my daughter during such a crisis. Michael arrived around noon, and I could hear the concern in his voice as he spoke with the nurses before entering my room. "Dad, I came as soon as I heard," he said, pulling up a chair beside the bed. "The doctors are saying it's cancer? How is that possible? You just had a physical 6 months ago." For the first few hours, everything seemed normal. Both of my children were attentive, worried, asking Dr. Richardson detailed questions about my condition and prognosis. They took turns sitting with me, sometimes together, sometimes alone. Sarah brought flowers, white lilies, my favorites, and arranged them on the windowsill where I could see them if I were conscious. Linda arrived in the late afternoon, and her entrance was more dramatic than the others. I heard her arguing with someone in the hallway before she came into the room. When she saw me, she began crying immediately. "Marcus, I'm so sorry," she said, though I wasn't sure what she was apologizing for. Our divorce had been amicable enough, considering the circumstances. We had grown apart over the years, wanting different things from life, but we had managed to remain civil for the sake of our children. David was the last to arrive, showing up just as the sun was setting over Manhattan. My brother had always been more reserved than the others, less emotional, more practical. He stood at the foot of my bed for a long time without saying anything, just looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "The doctor says you might be able to hear us," he finally said. "If that's true, I want you to know that I'll take care of everything. The restaurants, the business, all of it. You don't need to worry about anything." That first day, surrounded by my family, listening to their words of love and concern, I began to question whether Dr. Richardson and I had made a terrible mistake. These people seemed genuinely devastated by my condition. Sarah had tears in her eyes every time she looked at me. Michael kept asking the doctors if there was anything else they could do, any experimental treatments they could try. Linda held my hand and told me stories about our early years together, when we were young and struggling and deeply in love. But Dr. Richardson had warned me that the first day or two would be different. "People behave differently when they're in shock," he had said. "Give it time. If there are ulterior motives, they'll surface once the initial shock wears off and people start thinking more clearly about the practical implications of your condition." As night fell and the hospital grew quieter, my family began to disperse. Sarah said she would be back first thing in the morning. Michael mentioned he was staying at a hotel nearby and would return after making some phone calls to cancel his work appointments. Linda kissed my forehead before leaving, whispering that she would be praying for a miracle. David was the last to leave, and as he stood by my bed, he said something that made my blood run cold. "I've already called the lawyers, Marcus. If you can hear me, don't worry about the business. I'll make sure everything is handled properly." Lawyers? Why would he be calling lawyers on the first day? I was supposedly in a coma, not dead. There was no immediate need for legal intervention unless... As the door closed behind David and I was left alone with only the sound of the machines and the distant hum of the hospital, I realized that Dr. Richardson had been right to suggest this test. Even on the first day, Cracks were already beginning to show in the facade of family devotion. The night seemed endless. Every few hours, a nurse would come in to check my vital signs, adjust my or simply observe my condition. I had to remain perfectly still, breathing steadily, showing no signs of consciousness even when they shined lights in my eyes or tested my reflexes. Around 3 in the morning, I heard footsteps in the hallway and whispered voices outside my door. The conversation was too quiet for me to make out the words, but something about the tone made me strain to listen. After a few minutes, the voices faded away, leaving me alone with my thoughts and growing suspicions. When morning came and the hospital began to bustle with activity again, I prepared myself for day 2 of what was already proving to be a revelation I wasn't sure I wanted to continue experiencing. The second day began much like the first, with family members arriving to maintain their vigil beside my bed. But as Dr. Richardson had predicted, the shock was beginning to wear off, and people were starting to think more practically about the situation. Sarah was the first to arrive, carrying a cup of coffee and what looked like a stack of documents. She sat in the chair beside my bed and, after looking around to make sure we were alone, began making phone calls. "Yes, I need to speak with someone about medical power of attorney," she said into her phone, her voice much more businesslike than it had been the day before. "My father is in a coma, and we need to understand what our options are." Medical power of attorney? I had already designated Dr. Richardson as my medical proxy years ago, and Sarah knew this. Why would she be inquiring about it now? The conversation continued for several minutes, with Sarah asking detailed questions about legal procedures, timelines, and requirements for making medical decisions on behalf of an incapacitated family member. When she hung up, she sat quietly for a moment, then pulled out a small notebook and began writing. Michael arrived about an hour later, and I could immediately sense tension between him and Sarah. They stepped out into the hallway to talk, but their voices carried through the partially open door. "Did you bring the papers?" Michael asked. "I have them, but I don't think this is the right time," Sarah replied. "When is the right time? He could wake up tomorrow, or he could." Michael's voice trailed off, but the implication was clear. "The lawyers say we need to be careful. If he regains consciousness and finds out we were trying to make legal changes while he was incapacitated, it could cause problems later." They were talking about legal papers, about making changes while I was unconscious. The guilt I had felt the day before about deceiving them was rapidly being replaced by a cold realization that my suspicions had been justified. When they returned to my room, their demeanor had changed. They were still caring and attentive, but there was an underlying tension, a sense that they were putting on a performance. Sarah continued to hold my hand and talk to me about mundane things, but I could see her checking her watch frequently, as if she had somewhere else she needed to be. Around noon, Linda arrived with someone I didn't recognize, a tall, well-dressed man who looked uncomfortable in the hospital setting. She introduced him to Sarah and Michael as a friend who's been helping me through this difficult time. The man shook hands with my children, expressed his condolences, and then stepped back to let Linda approach my bed. "Marcus, honey," Linda said, her voice sickeningly sweet, "I want you to know that no matter what happens, you don't need to worry about me. I've been talking to some financial advisors, and I think I'll be just fine." Financial advisors? She was already planning for life after my death, and I had only been unconscious for 24 hours. The man Linda had brought with her stayed in the background, but I could feel him watching everything, taking mental notes about the room, the equipment, the family dynamics. Something about his presence made me deeply uncomfortable, though I couldn't quite put my finger on why. As the afternoon wore on, I began to notice other changes in my family's behavior. Conversations became more hushed when they thought I might be able to hear them. People stepped out of the room more frequently to make phone calls. There were more documents being shuffled around, more references to lawyers and financial advisors and practical considerations. The most disturbing moment came in the early evening, when I was alone with Michael. He was sitting beside my bed, supposedly reading a magazine, when his phone rang. He answered it quickly, checking first to make sure I showed no signs of consciousness. Yeah, I'm at the hospital now, he said quietly. No change in his condition. The doctors are saying it could be weeks, maybe months. I know, but we need to be patient. Trust me, everything is going according to plan. According to plan? What plan? My heart began racing, but I forced myself to maintain the steady, shallow breathing pattern that indicated deep unconsciousness. Michael continued his conversation for several more minutes, using phrases like, "when the time comes," and "once everything is settled," and "nobody will suspect anything." When he hung up, he sat quietly for a moment, then leaned closer to my bed. "Dad, if you can hear me, I want you to know that I'm going to take good care of everything. The business, the money, all of it. You worked so hard to build something lasting, and I promise it won't be wasted." But the way he said it, the tone in his voice, made it sound less like a promise and more like a threat. As night fell on the second day, I lay in that hospital bed feeling more alone than I had ever felt in my entire life. The people I loved most in the world, the people I had sacrificed everything to provide for, were already making plans for my death. They weren't hoping for my recovery, they were preparing for my funeral. Dr. Richardson stopped by late that evening, after visiting hours had ended and the hospital had grown quiet. He checked my vital signs, adjusted my medication, and then leaned close to whisper in my ear. "How are you holding up?" he asked softly. I couldn't respond, couldn't move, couldn't give him any sign that I was hearing things I never wanted to hear. But I think he understood from the slight change in my heart rate on the monitor that this experiment was already more painful than either of us had anticipated. "We can stop this any time," he whispered. "Just give me any sign, and I'll wake you up right now." But I couldn't stop. Not yet. I needed to know the full truth, no matter how much it hurt. I needed to see just how far they were willing to go, how deep their betrayal ran. Because if I was going to make decisions about my legacy, about who deserved to inherit the empire I had built, I needed all the information I could get. The third day brought revelations that shattered whatever remaining illusions I might have had about my family's motivations. But it also brought something I hadn't expected: the emergence of genuine care from a source I had never anticipated. The morning began with what appeared to be a family meeting in my room. Sarah, Michael, Linda, and David were all present, along with Linda's mysterious friend from the day before. They had arranged chairs in a circle near my bed, and they were speaking in hushed tones that barely qualified as whispers. "The lawyers say we have several options," Sarah was saying, consulting a legal pad covered with notes. "But we need to be unanimous in whatever we decide." "What about the power of attorney situation?" David asked. "That's complicated," Michael replied. "Dad was smart when he set up his medical directives. Dr. Richardson has the authority to make medical decisions, but we retain the right to challenge those decisions if we can demonstrate that they're not in his best interests." Challenge Dr. Richardson's medical decisions? What could that possibly mean? Linda's friend finally spoke up, and his voice confirmed what I had already begun to suspect about him. "From a legal standpoint, if the family is in agreement that continued life support is causing unnecessary suffering, most courts will support a decision to transition to comfort care." Comfort care. They were talking about removing my life support. They were discussing letting me die, and I had only been unconscious for 2 days. "But what if he wakes up?" Sarah asked. "The medical records are clear," David said. "The cancer has spread to his brain. Even if he regains consciousness, he would be severely impaired. The quality of life issues alone would justify our decision." I felt like I was listening to my own execution being planned. These people, my own family, were calmly discussing ending my life so they could claim their inheritance. The betrayal was so complete, so devastating, that I almost gave up the pretense right then and there. But then something unexpected happened. The door to my room opened, and I heard a familiar voice that brought the first genuine warmth I had felt since this ordeal began. "Excuse me," the voice said, "but I was told Mr. Marcus was here." It was Jennifer, my secretary and office manager for the past 15 years. Jennifer had started working for me when she was just 23, fresh out of college with a business degree and more determination than experience. Over the years, she had become indispensable to my operations, managing not just my schedule and correspondence, but also handling many of the day-to-day details that kept my restaurant empire running smoothly. "I'm sorry," Sarah said, her voice taking on that polite but dismissive tone she used with people she considered beneath her social status. "But this is family time. Perhaps you could come back later." "I understand," Jennifer replied, her voice steady despite what I could tell was nervousness. "But I just wanted to see how he was doing. Mr. Marcus has been more than just a boss to me. He's been, like a father." Like a father. Those words hit me harder than anything else I had heard in the past 2 days. Jennifer had never been particularly emotional or sentimental in our working relationship. She was professional, efficient, reliable. But there was something in her voice now that spoke to a deeper connection than I had ever realized existed. "Well, as you can see, he's not conscious," Michael said curtly. "There's really nothing for you to do here." "I'd like to stay for just a few minutes, if that's okay," Jennifer said. "I won't interfere with your family time. I just want to say goodbye." Say goodbye. While my family was planning my death, my secretary was preparing to say goodbye to someone she cared about. The contrast was so stark it was almost surreal. "Fine," Linda said. "But we're in the middle of an important discussion, so if you could just—" "Of course," Jennifer said. "I'll just sit over here quietly." I heard the sound of a chair being moved, and then Jennifer's presence settled into the room like a calming influence. My family's conversation, which had been flowing so freely just moments before, suddenly became more guarded, more careful. "Perhaps we should continue this discussion elsewhere," David suggested. "Good idea," Sarah agreed. "We can use the family conference room down the hall." One by one, they filed out of my room, leaving me alone with Jennifer. For several minutes, she didn't say anything. I could hear her moving around, and then I felt her presence closer to my bed. "Mr. Marcus," she said softly, "I don't know if you can hear me, but I need to tell you something." She paused, and I could sense her struggling with her emotions. "When I started working for you 15 years ago, I was lost. I had student loans I couldn't pay, an apartment I could barely afford, and no real direction in my life. You didn't just give me a job, you gave me a purpose. You taught me about business, about leadership, about treating people with dignity and respect." Her voice was getting stronger, more confident. "You never knew this, but when my mother was sick 5 years ago, I was planning to quit so I could take care of her. The medical bills were overwhelming, and I couldn't afford to keep working while paying for her treatment. But somehow, my health insurance through the company suddenly improved, and there was a special fund that covered all of her expenses. I always suspected you had something to do with that, but you never said anything." She was right. I had quietly arranged for enhanced medical coverage for all my employees, and I had personally covered the costs that insurance didn't handle. But I had done it anonymously, through the HR department, because I didn't want anyone to feel obligated or embarrassed. "You've been generous and kind to everyone who works for you," Jennifer continued. "You remember people's birthdays, their children's names, their personal struggles. You've paid for employees' children to go to college, helped people buy their first homes, created opportunities for advancement that changed entire families' lives." As she spoke, I realized that Jennifer saw me more clearly than my own family did. She understood what I had tried to build, not just in terms of business success, but in terms of human impact. My restaurants weren't just about food, they were about creating jobs, supporting communities, and providing opportunities for people who might not otherwise have them. "I know your family is going through a difficult time right now," Jennifer said, and there was something in her tone that suggested she had overheard at least part of their conversation. "But I want you to know that no matter what happens, your legacy is secure. The thousands of people whose lives you've touched, the communities you've supported, the opportunities you've created, none of that can ever be taken away." She was quiet for a moment, and then I felt her hand gently touch mine. "I've arranged for a private nurse to stay with you at night," she said. "Her name is Mrs. Patterson, and she's someone I trust completely. I don't want you to be alone during this time, and I want to make sure you're getting the best possible care. A private nurse? Jennifer was spending her own money to ensure my comfort, while my family was planning to remove my life support. I'll be back tomorrow, she said, and every day until you're better. Because I have to believe you're going to get better. I have to believe that someone as strong and determined as you won't give up without a fight. After Jennifer left, I lay in that bed processing everything I had heard. The contrast between my family's behavior and my secretary's devotion was so stark that it forced me to reconsider everything I thought I knew about loyalty, about love, about what it meant to be family. My biological family, the people who shared my blood and bore my name, were treating my illness as a business opportunity. They were making plans, consulting lawyers, discussing timelines for my death as if it were a corporate merger. But Jennifer, who owed me nothing beyond a paycheck, was treating my illness as a personal tragedy. She was spending her own money to ensure my comfort, arranging for additional care, and speaking about my legacy in terms of the human impact I had made rather than the financial assets I would leave behind. As the afternoon wore on and my family returned from their conference room meeting, I noticed that their behavior toward me had changed again. They were more distant, more clinical in their interactions. Sarah checked her watch more frequently. Michael spent more time on his phone, having hushed conversations in the hallway. Linda barely looked at me at all, instead focusing on her mysterious companion who seemed to be taking notes about everything he observed. But the most chilling moment came when David approached my bed and leaned close, as if he were going to whisper something comforting in my ear. "Marcus," he said quietly, "I want you to know that when this is over, I'm going to take good care of the business we built together. I'm going to expand it, grow it, make it into something even bigger than what we achieved together." He paused, glancing toward the door to make sure no one else was listening. "Of course, I'll have to make some changes. Streamline operations, reduce unnecessary expenses, eliminate some of the charitable programs that have been draining profits. But don't worry about any of that now. Just focus on resting. Eliminate the charitable programs." David was planning to dismantle everything I had built to support my employees and their communities. All the college scholarships, the medical assistance funds, the community development initiatives, he saw them as unnecessary expenses rather than the heart and soul of what we had created together. That evening, as visiting hours ended and my family prepared to leave, I heard Sarah and Michael having another whispered conversation in the hallway. "How much longer do we wait?" Michael was asking. "The lawyers say we need to be patient," Sarah replied. "If we move too quickly, it could raise questions later. But every day we wait is another day of medical expenses, another day of uncertainty. What if he actually starts to recover?" "He won't," Sarah said with a certainty that chilled me to the bone. "The medical records are clear. This is terminal. It's just a matter of time now." They were talking about my death with the same casual tone they might use to discuss the weather. There was no grief in their voices, no hope for my recovery, no sense of loss for the relationship they were about to lose forever. There was only impatience for the process to be completed so they could move on to the next phase of their lives. As the hospital grew quiet and the night shift took over, I found myself looking forward to meeting Mrs. Patterson, the private nurse Jennifer had arranged. At this point, the kindness of a stranger seemed more appealing than the calculated concern of my own family. Mrs. Patterson arrived around 10 o'clock, introducing herself to the hospital staff and settling into the chair beside my bed. She was an older woman with a gentle voice and a calm presence that immediately made the room feel more peaceful. "Hello, Mr. Marcus," she said softly. "My name is Rose Patterson. Jennifer asked me to keep you company during the night hours. She's very concerned about you, that young lady is. She must think very highly of you to arrange for private care like this." She busied herself with small tasks adjusting my blanket, checking the flowers on the windowsill, ensuring that my water pitcher was full even though I supposedly couldn't drink it. Her movements were careful and caring, the actions of someone who understood that dignity and comfort mattered even when a patient couldn't express their needs. I've been a nurse for 38 years, Mrs. Patterson said as she settled into her chair with some knitting. And I've learned that hearing is often the last sense to go. So I'm going to assume you can hear everything I'm saying, and I'm going to treat you accordingly. She was right, of course, though not in the way she imagined. I could hear everything not because I was dying, but because I was very much alive and growing more disillusioned with each passing hour. Jennifer told me a little about you, Mrs. Patterson continued, her knitting needles clicking softly in the quiet room. She says you're a good man, a generous employer, someone who cares about his community. That's becoming rare these days, you know. Most wealthy people I've encountered in my years of private nursing, well, let's just say they're more concerned with protecting their assets than sharing their blessings. As she talked, Mrs. Patterson told me stories about other patients she had cared for, about families she had observed during times of crisis, about the different ways people responded to mortality. Her voice was soothing, her presence comforting in a way that my own family's visits had not been. The thing that always amazes me, she said around midnight, is how crisis reveals people's true character. Some folks rise to the occasion, showing love and selflessness you never would have expected. Others show you exactly who they really are when they think nobody's watching. Her words seemed to carry a deeper meaning, and I wondered if she had overheard some of my family's conversations, or if she had simply observed enough human nature over her decades of nursing to recognize the patterns she was seeing in my room. As the night deepened and the hospital grew even quieter, Mrs. Patterson continued her gentle vigil, occasionally checking my vital signs, adjusting my position to prevent bed sores, and maintaining a steady stream of quiet, comforting conversation. Her presence was like a guardian angel, protecting me from the loneliness and despair that threatened to overwhelm me as I processed the devastating revelations of the past 2 days. For the first time since this ordeal began, I felt truly cared for. Not as a source of inheritance or a business opportunity, but as a human being deserving of dignity, comfort, and compassion. It was a feeling I had never expected to experience from a stranger, and one that threw into sharp relief just how much my own family's behavior had changed over the years. As dawn approached and Mrs. Patterson prepared to end her shift, she leaned close to my bed one final time. "Mr. Marcus," she whispered, "I don't know what your situation is, but I want you to know that you're not alone. There are people who care about you, people who see your worth beyond whatever material things you might possess. Hold on to that thought, whatever happens next." With those words, she quietly gathered her things and left me alone with my thoughts and the growing realization that this experiment in deception was revealing truths I was not sure I was prepared to handle. But I was only 3 days into what would prove to be a 3-week journey into the darkest corners of human nature and family dynamics. The worst revelations were yet to come, and before this was over, I would discover just how far people were willing to go when they thought nobody was watching and billions of dollars were at stake. The 4th day brought a revelation that cut deeper than anything I had experienced so far. It was a Wednesday morning when David, my brother, my business partner for over 20 years, the man who had stood beside me as we built our empire from a single food cart in the Bronx, showed me exactly what our decades of partnership had meant to him. He arrived earlier than usual, around 7 in the morning, carrying a leather briefcase I had never seen before. The hospital was still quiet, the morning shift just beginning their rounds, and David seemed to have timed his visit to ensure maximum privacy. "Good morning, Marcus," he said, settling into the chair beside my bed with the casual familiarity of someone who had done this many times before. But there was something different in his tone today, something that made my skin crawl even as I lay there motionless. For several minutes, he simply sat there, occasionally glancing at his watch as if he were waiting for something. Then his phone buzzed, and he answered it immediately. "Yeah, I'm here now," he said quietly, his voice taking on a businesslike tone I had heard him use in countless board meetings over the years. "He's still unconscious. No change since yesterday. The doctors are saying it could be weeks, maybe months, but honestly, I don't think he's going to make it much longer." He paused, listening to whoever was on the other end of the call, and what I heard next made my blood run cold. "Look, I've been thinking about this all night," David continued. And I think we need to move forward with the plan we discussed. Yes, I know it's risky, but we can't wait forever. Every day he stays alive is another day we risk him waking up and discovering what we've been doing. What they had been doing. What plan? I forced myself to maintain the steady, shallow breathing pattern that indicated deep unconsciousness, but inside, my heart was racing. David got up and walked to the window, lowering his voice even further. The papers are ready. I have them right here in my briefcase. All we need is for the medical team to confirm that his condition has deteriorated to the point where intervention is necessary. Papers. Medical intervention. They weren't just waiting for me to die naturally, they were actively planning to make it happen. I know, David said into the phone. But Dr. Richardson is the problem. He keeps saying Marcus is stable, that there's no immediate danger. We need to find a way to influence his medical opinion. Influence Dr. Richardson's medical opinion? They were talking about bribing or coercing my doctor to declare me terminal so they could justify ending my life support. David continued his conversation for another 10 minutes, and with each passing moment, the scope of their conspiracy became clearer. They had been planning this for months, possibly years. The sudden discovery of my cancer, the rapid deterioration, the family meetings about difficult decisions, it was all orchestrated to create a legal framework for murder. When David finally hung up and returned to my bedside, he opened his briefcase and pulled out a stack of legal documents. He spread them out on the small table next to my bed, occasionally referring to specific pages as he made additional phone calls. Yes, I need to speak with Dr. Morrison, he said into his phone. Dr. Morrison wasn't my doctor, I had never heard the name before. This is David Jenkins, regarding the Marcus Williams case. Yes, we discussed the consultation yesterday. I think it's time to move forward with the second opinion we talked about. A second opinion. They were bringing in another doctor, someone who would presumably be more cooperative with their plans than Dr. Richardson had been. For the next hour, David worked methodically through his briefcase full of documents, making phone calls, scheduling meetings, and coordinating what could only be described as a systematic plan to end my life. The most chilling part was how calm and businesslike he was about the entire process. This wasn't a crime of passion or a desperate act, it was a calculated business decision. Around 9 o'clock, Sarah and Michael arrived together, and David immediately began briefing them on his morning's work. I've made contact with Dr. Morrison, he said quietly. He's willing to provide a second opinion that contradicts Richardson's assessment. According to Morrison, the brain scans show much more extensive damage than Richardson has been reporting. What about the legal issues? Sarah asked, pulling out her own notebook filled with what appeared to be research on medical law. Our attorney says that if we have two medical opinions stating that continued life support is causing unnecessary suffering, and if the family is unanimous in requesting comfort care, most judges will approve the decision within 48 hours. Michael leaned forward, his voice barely above a whisper. And Richardson can't stop us? Richardson can protest, but he can't override a court order, David replied. Especially if we can demonstrate that his judgment has been compromised by his personal relationship with Marcus. They were planning to discredit Dr. Richardson, the one person who was protecting me from their scheme. The irony was devastating. The man who had helped me stage this deception to discover my family's true nature was now the only thing standing between me and actual murder. When do we move forward? Sarah asked. Dr. Morrison will be here this afternoon to conduct his examination, David said. If everything goes according to plan, we can file the petition with the court by tomorrow morning. Tomorrow morning. In less than 24 hours, they would be asking a judge for permission to kill me. The conversation continued for another hour, with the three of them going over legal strategies, discussing potential obstacles, and refining their timeline. They talked about my death the same way they might discuss a hostile corporate takeover, with careful planning, strategic thinking, and complete emotional detachment. What struck me most was how easily they had slipped into this conspiracy. There was no moral wrestling, no expressions of guilt or uncertainty. They had moved from loving family members to would-be murderers with a smooth efficiency that suggested they had been thinking about this possibility for a long time. When they finally left to meet with their attorney, I was left alone with the devastating realization that my experiment in deception had uncovered something far worse than greed or selfishness. My own family was planning to murder me for my money, and they were doing it with the cold calculation of experienced criminals. The afternoon brought Dr. Morrison, just as David had promised. He was a thin, nervous-looking man with shifty eyes and a manner that immediately made me suspicious. Unlike Dr. Richardson, who always treated me with warmth and familiarity, Dr. Morrison approached my bed like I was already dead. "Mr. Williams," he said formally, "I'm Dr. Morrison. I've been asked to provide a second opinion regarding your condition." He spent the next hour conducting what appeared to be a thorough examination, checking my reflexes, shining lights in my eyes, and reviewing the fabricated medical records that Dr. Richardson had created. But there was something perfunctory about his examination, as if he were going through the motions of a diagnosis he had already decided to make. When my family returned, Dr. Morrison delivered his verdict with the solemnity of a judge pronouncing a death sentence. "I'm afraid the situation is much more serious than Dr. Richardson has indicated," he said, consulting a clipboard that seemed to contain a predetermined script rather than genuine medical observations. "The brain scans show extensive damage throughout multiple regions. In my professional opinion, Mr. Williams has no realistic chance of recovery, and continued life support is simply prolonging his suffering." "So you're recommending comfort care?" David asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. "I believe it would be the most humane course of action," Dr. Morrison replied. "Transitioning to comfort care would allow Mr. Williams to pass peacefully, without the artificial prolonging of life that serves no therapeutic purpose." It was a death sentence delivered with medical terminology, but a death sentence nonetheless. After Dr. Morrison left, my family huddled together in excited whispers, discussing the next steps in their plan. They scheduled a meeting with their attorney for that evening, planned to file their petition with the court the next morning, and estimated that I would be dead within 72 hours. But then something unexpected happened that would prove to be my salvation. Jennifer arrived for her daily visit just as my family was preparing to leave for their meeting with the attorney. She had been coming every day since that first encounter, usually staying for about an hour to sit with me and provide the kind of genuine companionship that my own family had stopped offering. "Good evening," she said politely to Sarah, Michael, and David as they gathered their briefcases and legal documents. "I hope Mr. Marcus is having a peaceful day." "Actually," Sarah said with poorly concealed irritation, "we're dealing with some difficult medical decisions right now, so this probably isn't the best time for visitors." "I understand," Jennifer replied calmly. "But I promised him I would visit every day, and I intend to keep that promise regardless of what else is happening." There was something in Jennifer's tone that suggested she sensed the undercurrents of what was really going on, even if she didn't understand the full scope of the conspiracy. David stepped forward, his voice taking on the authoritative tone he used when he wanted to intimidate subordinates. "Jennifer, we appreciate your concern, but this is a family matter now. The doctors have determined that Marcus's condition is terminal, and we need to make some very difficult decisions about his care. I think it would be best if you limited your visits going forward." "With all due respect," Jennifer replied, her voice remaining steady despite what I could tell was rising anger. "Mr. Marcus has been like a father to me for 15 years. I'm not going anywhere." The standoff continued for several more minutes, with David becoming increasingly aggressive in his attempts to get Jennifer to leave, and Jennifer becoming increasingly determined to stay. Finally, Sarah intervened with a different approach. "Jennifer, I'm sure you care about my father, but you have to understand that watching him like this, day after day, isn't healthy for anyone. The doctors are saying he could linger like this for weeks or months. Perhaps it would be better for everyone, including him, if we allowed him to let go." Let go. They were testing Jennifer, trying to see if she would support their decision to end my life support. "Mr. Marcus is a fighter," Jennifer said firmly. He's overcome obstacles his entire life that would have defeated lesser men. I refuse to believe that he would want to give up now, and I refuse to give up on him." Her words hung in the air like a challenge to everything my family had been planning. Here was someone who believed in my strength, my will to live, my capacity to overcome adversity, all the qualities that my own children seemed to have forgotten I possessed. "Well," Michael said coldly, "fortunately, medical decisions aren't made based on the wishful thinking of employees. They're made based on medical science and the wishes of legal family members." "And what if Mr. Marcus's wishes are different from yours?" Jennifer asked, her voice now carrying a steel edge I had never heard before. "What if he would want to fight, to try every possible treatment, to never give up?" "That's exactly why we're making these decisions now," David replied. "While he's unable to suffer through the futile hope of treatments that won't work." The exchange continued for several more minutes, but it was clear that neither side was going to back down. My family was determined to proceed with their plan, and Jennifer was equally determined to oppose any decision that involved giving up on my recovery. Finally, after my family left for their meeting with the attorney, Jennifer settled into the chair beside my bed with a heavy sigh. "Mr. Marcus," she said quietly, "I don't know if you can hear me, but I need you to know that something isn't right here. Your family is talking about ending your life support, but I've been researching your condition, and the medical literature doesn't support their claims about your prognosis." She had been researching my condition. While my family was consulting lawyers about how to kill me, Jennifer was consulting medical journals about how to save me. "I've arranged for an independent medical review," she continued. "Dr. Sarah Chin from Mount Sinai's neurology department has agreed to examine your case files and provide an objective assessment of your condition. She doesn't know your family, doesn't know me, and doesn't have any financial interest in the outcome." An independent medical review. Jennifer was taking steps to protect me that my own family should have been taking. "I've also contacted a patient advocacy organization that specializes in cases where families and medical providers disagree about treatment decisions. They're sending someone to meet with me tomorrow morning to discuss your rights and options." Patient advocacy. Legal protection. Medical oversight. Jennifer was single-handedly constructing a defense against my family's conspiracy, even though she had no idea how extensive that conspiracy really was. "I know I'm just your secretary," she said, her voice breaking slightly with emotion. "And I know I don't have any legal standing in your medical decisions. But I also know that the man who taught me about integrity and perseverance, and never giving up, wouldn't want his family to surrender without exploring every possible option." She was right. The real Marcus Williams would want to fight, would want every possible treatment explored, would never accept defeat without a battle. But the irony was that I wasn't actually dying, I was just pretending to be dying in order to discover exactly what Jennifer had now uncovered: my family's willingness to kill me for money. As Jennifer sat with me that evening, occasionally reading from business magazines or updating me on the day-to-day operations of my restaurants, I realized that this woman had become more than just an employee. She had become the daughter I wished I had, the family member who actually embodied the values I had tried to instill in my children. When Mrs. Patterson arrived for her night shift, she and Jennifer had a long conversation about my condition, my family's behavior, and their growing concerns about the medical decisions being made on my behalf. It was clear that both women sensed something was wrong, even if they couldn't identify exactly what it was. "Something about this whole situation feels off," Mrs. Patterson said as Jennifer prepared to leave. "I've been nursing for almost 40 years, and I've never seen a family so eager to give up on a patient who's medically stable." "That's exactly what's bothering me," Jennifer replied. "Mr. Marcus built a business empire from nothing. He's overcome poverty, discrimination, business failures, and personal setbacks that would have destroyed most people. The idea that he would want his family to give up on him after just a few days doesn't match anything I know about his character." They were seeing what I was seeing, that my family's rush to end my life had nothing to do with my medical condition and everything to do with their desire to claim my inheritance. As the night deepened and Mrs. Patterson settled in for her vigil, I found myself feeling grateful for these two women who barely knew each other but had united in their determination to protect me. They were providing the kind of care and advocacy that I should have been receiving from my own family, and they were doing it not because they stood to gain anything from my survival, but because they genuinely believed in my worth as a human being. The fifth day dawned with an intensity that made it clear the next 24 hours would determine whether I lived or died. My family arrived early, accompanied by their attorney and armed with legal documents that would authorize the hospital to begin the process of ending my life support. But they weren't prepared for the opposition they would face. Dr. Richardson was the first surprise. Instead of the cooperative medical professional they had expected to encounter, they found a doctor who had spent the previous evening reviewing every aspect of my case and consulting with colleagues about the ethics of the decisions being proposed. "I'm afraid I can't support the recommendation for comfort care," Dr. Richardson announced when my family presented him with Dr. Morrison's assessment and their legal petition. "My examination of the patient shows stable vital signs, normal brain activity patterns, and no indication of the extensive neurological damage that Dr. Morrison has claimed to identify." Normal brain activity patterns. Of course, my brain activity was normal. I was fully conscious and listening to every word of their conversation. "But Dr. Morrison is a respected neurologist," Sarah protested. "His credentials are impeccable." "Dr. Morrison's credentials may be impeccable," Dr. Richardson replied coldly, "but his examination of this patient was cursory at best. More importantly, I've discovered some disturbing information about Dr. Morrison's recent disciplinary issues with the State Medical Board." Disciplinary issues. Dr. Richardson had done his homework and discovered that the doctor my family had bribed to provide a false diagnosis had a history of ethical violations. The confrontation between Dr. Richardson and my family continued for over an hour, with accusations flying in both directions. My family accused him of being emotionally compromised by his friendship with me. Dr. Richardson accused them of shopping for a diagnosis that supported a predetermined outcome rather than seeking genuine medical advice. But the real surprise came when Jennifer arrived, accompanied by a woman I didn't recognize but whose presence immediately shifted the dynamic in the room. "This is Attorney Patricia Walsh," Jennifer announced. "She specializes in patient rights and medical ethics. She's here to ensure that Mr. Marcus's legal interests are protected during this decision-making process." An attorney. Jennifer had hired an attorney to protect my interests. Attorney Walsh immediately took control of the situation with the kind of professional authority that comes from years of experience in medical law. She reviewed the legal documents my family had prepared, questioned Dr. Morrison's qualifications and the circumstances of his examination, and demanded full disclosure of any financial arrangements between my family and their medical consultants. "I'm also requesting an immediate ethics review by the hospital's medical board," Walsh announced. "Any decision to terminate life support for a stable patient based on a single consultation with a physician who has a documented history of questionable medical judgments raises serious ethical concerns." My family's carefully orchestrated plan was falling apart in real time. The legal framework they had constructed was being challenged by professionals who actually understood medical law and ethics. The doctors they had bribed were being investigated by medical authorities. Their timeline for my death was being disrupted by people who refused to accept their authority to make life and death decisions on my behalf. "Furthermore," Walsh continued, "I'm placing the hospital on notice that any attempt to implement comfort care protocols without following proper legal procedures will result in criminal charges for negligent homicide." Criminal charges. The stakes had just escalated from civil litigation to potential imprisonment. David tried to regain control of the situation by asserting his authority as my business partner and designated healthcare proxy, but Walsh quickly shot down that claim. "According to the legal documents on file with this hospital," she said, consulting a thick folder of paperwork, "Dr. Richardson is the designated medical decision-maker for Mr. Williams. None of you have legal standing to override his medical judgment without a court order, and obtaining that court order will require a full evidentiary hearing where all of your actions and motivations will be subject to public scrutiny." Public scrutiny. The last thing my family wanted was a public examination of their behavior during my illness. The meeting ended with my family retreating to consult with their attorney, Dr. Richardson, maintaining his position that I was medically stable and should continue receiving full care, and Attorney Walsh filing legal motions that would prevent any changes to my treatment without a full judicial review. But the most significant development came in the afternoon, when Jennifer returned with another surprise that would completely change the trajectory of the situation. "Mr. Marcus," she said, settling into her usual chair beside my bed, "I need to tell you about something I discovered today. I was going through your office files, trying to understand more about your medical history, and I found something interesting." She paused, and I could sense her choosing her words carefully. "I found a letter you wrote to Dr. Richardson about 6 months ago, discussing your concerns about your family's behavior and your desire to understand their true motivations. The letter mentions something about wanting to test their loyalty when the time was right." My heart nearly stopped. Jennifer had found evidence of the plan Dr. Richardson and I had developed, the conspiracy to fake my illness and observe my family's reactions. "I also found correspondence with a private investigator who has been monitoring your family's financial activities for the past year. According to his reports, your son Michael has been embezzling money from the restaurant accounts, your daughter Sarah has been using her position in the company to funnel business to her own consulting firm, and your brother David has been systematically transferring company assets to accounts under his personal control. Embezzlement, financial fraud, corporate theft. My family hadn't just been waiting for me to die so they could inherit my money, they had been stealing it while I was alive." The private investigator's final report, dated just 2 weeks before your accident, recommends immediate legal action to recover the stolen funds and remove the perpetrators from their positions in the company. Jennifer had discovered the complete truth, not just about my family's willingness to kill me for my inheritance, but about their ongoing theft of my assets. "Mr. Marcus," she said quietly, "I don't understand everything that's happening here, but I know enough to realize that your illness came at a very convenient time for people who were about to be exposed for financial crimes." She was connecting the dots, realizing that my sudden medical crisis had provided perfect cover for people who were already stealing from me and who would benefit enormously from my death. "I've turned all of this information over to Attorney Walsh," Jennifer continued, "and she's contacted the FBI's white-collar crime division. There's going to be a full investigation of your family's financial activities, and any attempt to end your life support while that investigation is ongoing will be treated as potential evidence destruction." The FBI. My family's plan to kill me had now attracted the attention of federal law enforcement. As the afternoon progressed, the hospital became a scene of barely controlled chaos. Federal agents arrived to interview hospital staff and secure medical records. Attorney Walsh filed multiple legal motions to prevent any changes to my treatment. Dr. Richardson was forced to provide detailed testimony about my condition and prognosis. My family was served with subpoenas requiring them to produce financial records dating back 5 years. But the most important development happened around 6 o'clock, when Dr. Richardson made a decision that would finally bring this nightmare to an end. "Jennifer," he said quietly, after ensuring that we were alone in my room, "I think it's time." "Time for what?" I couldn't respond, couldn't ask questions, couldn't indicate that I understood what he was suggesting. "I know you've been wondering about some of the inconsistencies in Mr. Marcus's condition," Dr. Richardson continued. "The fact that his vital signs are so stable despite the supposedly terminal diagnosis. The fact that his brain activity patterns are completely normal. The fact that none of his symptoms match the medical records that have been floating around." Dr. Richardson was about to reveal the truth to Jennifer. "There's something you need to know about Mr. Marcus's condition," he said, moving closer to my bed. "Something that explains everything that's been happening over the past few days." Jennifer leaned forward, her attention completely focused on Dr. Richardson's words. "Mr. Marcus isn't dying," Dr. Richardson said simply. "He isn't even sick. Everything about this medical crisis has been an elaborate performance designed to test his family's loyalty and discover their true motivations." The words hung in the air like a bombshell. Jennifer's face went through a series of expressions: confusion, disbelief, understanding, and finally a mixture of relief and anger. You mean he's been conscious this whole time? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Completely conscious. Fully aware. Listening to every conversation, witnessing every betrayal, seeing exactly how his family behaved when they thought he was helpless. Jennifer turned to look at me with new understanding, and for the first time in 5 days, I allowed my eyes to flutter open and meet her gaze. Mr. Marcus? She breathed, tears beginning to flow down her cheeks. You've been awake this whole time? I managed a small nod, the first voluntary movement I had made since this ordeal began. Oh my God! She whispered, reaching out to take my hand. What you must have heard. What you must have witnessed. Dr. Richardson began explaining the full scope of our deception: the fabricated medical records, the staged collapse, the deliberate testing of family loyalty that had uncovered far more betrayal than either of us had expected. But why didn't you tell me? Jennifer asked, her relief at my condition mixing with hurt that I had deceived her as well. Because, I said, my voice hoarse from days of silence, I needed to see who would stand by me when they thought I had nothing left to offer. I needed to know who loved Marcus the man, not Marcus the bank account. Jennifer squeezed my hand tighter, her tears flowing freely now. You could have died. If your family had succeeded in convincing the court to end your life support. But they didn't succeed, I replied, struggling to sit up in the bed. Because you wouldn't let them. Because you fought for me when my own children were planning my murder. Because you saw something worth saving when they only saw an obstacle to their inheritance. The irony was overwhelming. My biological family, the people who shared my DNA and my name, had been willing to kill me for money they were already stealing. But Jennifer, who owed me nothing beyond professional loyalty, had risked her own resources and reputation to protect my life. There's something else you need to know, Dr. Richardson said, his expression growing serious again. The FBI investigation that Jennifer initiated has uncovered evidence of financial crimes dating back several years. Your family isn't just guilty of planning your murder, they're guilty of systematically looting your business empire. As the full scope of my family's betrayal became clear, I realized that this experiment in deception had revealed something far worse than I had ever imagined possible. But it had also revealed something far better than I had dared to hope: that there were people in the world who would fight for me not because of what I could give them, but because of what I meant to them as a human being. The 6th day would bring the final confrontation, the moment when I would finally reveal myself to my family and confront them with the evidence of their betrayal. But that night, as I sat up in my hospital bed for the first time in nearly a week, surrounded by Jennifer and Dr. Richardson and Mrs. Patterson, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: the warmth of being part of a real family, one bound not by blood or obligation, but by genuine love and mutual respect. The 7th day arrived with the weight of revelation hanging in the air. I had spent the night planning exactly how I would confront my family, how I would reveal that their victim had been watching their every move, listening to their every betrayal. Dr. Richardson had scheduled what he told my family would be a final consultation about my condition. They arrived that morning with their attorney, their forged medical documents, and their court petition to end my life support. They were confident that today would be the day they finally removed the last obstacle to their inheritance. Sarah entered first, followed by Michael and David. Linda brought her mysterious companion, and all of them carried briefcases filled with the legal paperwork they believed would seal my fate. They arranged themselves around my bed exactly as they had done so many times before, speaking in those same hushed tones about my imminent death. The judge has agreed to an expedited hearing this afternoon, their attorney was saying. With Dr. Morrison's medical opinion and the family's unanimous consent, we should have approval to begin comfort care protocols by evening. How long after that? Michael asked with barely concealed eagerness. Usually 24 to 48 hours. The attorney replied. Sometimes less. They were discussing the timeline of my murder with the same casual efficiency they might use to plan a business meeting. But what they didn't know was that Dr. Richardson, Jennifer, Attorney Walsh, and 2 FBI agents were waiting just outside the door. Before we proceed, I said, my voice cutting through their whispered conversation like a blade, I think we need to have a family meeting. The silence that followed was absolute. Sarah's briefcase slipped from her hands and crashed to the floor, papers scattering everywhere. Michael's face went white as if all the blood had drained from his body. Linda actually stumbled backward, grabbing onto her companion's arm for support. David just stared at me with his mouth open, unable to process what he was seeing. Surprised to see me awake? I asked, slowly sitting up in the hospital bed and removing the oxygen mask that had been part of my disguise. Surprised that your dying father is actually alive and alert and has heard every single word you've said for the past week? Sarah was the first to find her voice. Daddy, we thought, the doctors said. The doctors said exactly what I told them to say, I replied, swinging my legs over the side of the bed and standing up for the first time in a week. This has all been an elaborate test, and I'm afraid you've all failed spectacularly. The door opened and Dr. Richardson entered, followed by Jennifer, Attorney Walsh, and the FBI agents. My family's faces went from shock to horror as they realized the full scope of what had been happening. David, I said, looking directly at my brother, did you really think I didn't know about the money you've been stealing from our accounts? Michael, did you believe I was unaware of your embezzlement schemes? Sarah, did you imagine I hadn't noticed how you've been funneling company business to your own firm? One by one, I confronted them with the evidence of their financial crimes, their conspiracy to murder me, their complete betrayal of everything our family had once meant. But what hurt most wasn't the money they had stolen, it was the cold calculation with which they had planned my death. You were going to kill me, I said, my voice breaking slightly with the weight of that realization. Your own father, your own brother. You were going to murder me for money you were already stealing. The FBI agents stepped forward and began reading them their rights. One by one, my family members were handcuffed and led away charged with conspiracy, embezzlement, attempted murder, and fraud. The people who should have been grieving my loss were instead being arrested for trying to cause it. As the room emptied of everyone except Jennifer, Dr. Richardson, and myself, I felt a strange mixture of vindication and profound sadness. I had discovered the truth I needed to know, but that truth had cost me my family forever. I'm sorry you had to go through this, Jennifer said, her eyes still red from crying. I can't imagine how it felt to hear your own children planning your death. It felt like dying, I admitted. But it also felt like being reborn. Because I discovered that family isn't about blood or genetics or legal obligations. It's about who stands beside you when everything falls apart. In the weeks that followed, I completely restructured my life and my legacy. Sarah, Michael, and David were prosecuted to the full extent of the law, convicted on multiple felony charges, and sentenced to substantial prison terms. Linda lost all financial support and discovered that her mysterious companion disappeared as soon as my money was no longer accessible. But most importantly, I rewrote my will. Jennifer became my primary beneficiary, inheriting not just my wealth but also the responsibility of continuing the values-based business practices that had always been the heart of my success. Together, we expanded the charitable programs my brother had wanted to eliminate, created scholarship funds for disadvantaged youth, and established a foundation that helps small business owners achieve their dreams. Mrs. Patterson became our family's permanent healthcare coordinator, and Dr. Richardson remained not just my physician but one of my closest advisors. These people, who had entered my life as professionals, became the family I had always wanted but never had. 3 years later, as I sit in my office overlooking the bustling streets of Harlem where my first restaurant still serves the community, I often think about those 7 days in the hospital bed. They were the most painful days of my life, but they were also the most important. They taught me that true wealth isn't measured in dollars or properties or stock portfolios, it's measured in the people who would sacrifice for you without expecting anything in return. My biological children chose money over love, inheritance over integrity, greed over gratitude. But Jennifer chose loyalty over personal gain, courage over comfort, and love over legal obligation. She became the daughter I never had, and I became the father she had always needed. The real tragedy isn't that I lost my family, it's that I never really had them to begin with. But the real blessing is that I discovered what family truly means, and I found it in the most unexpected places with the most extraordinary people. Thank you for staying with me through this difficult, but ultimately redemptive journey. The lesson I want to leave you with is this: money doesn't corrupt people, it reveals who they really are. When someone shows you their true character in moments of crisis, believe them. But also remember that the people worth trusting are often not the ones you expect. Sometimes your greatest treasures come disguised as ordinary employees, hired nurses, and family friends. Value those who love you when you have nothing to offer, because they're the ones who will remain when you truly need them. The greatest fortune you can accumulate isn't in your bank account, it's in the hearts of people who would fight for you simply because they believe you're worth fighting for.